Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from EnglishWithKirsty.com. I'm Kirsty, and I support multilingual professionals to discover their voice in English. On the podcast, we talk about language, learning, and intentional communication. We hear about my guests' language journeys and share tips that help you communicate in a way that makes sense and sounds like you. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the English with Kirsty podcast. And today we're going to get to know somebody new, somebody whom I don't know very well yet. So we're going to change that, and hopefully you will learn too about her story. And we're going to have a conversation about language and culture and language learning and wherever else this conversation goes. So welcome, Urmi. Thank you for joining us. Maybe you could start by telling us something about who you are.
Yes, for sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. My name is Urmi. I am based in Montreal and I am a finance professional. However, I do have a lot of passions and interests. I'm a self-published author, speaker, YouTuber, female mentor, a fellow podcaster, and I'm also a language learner. As I always like to say, I know almost five languages. They almost it's being Spanish, and I currently speak English, Italian, Bengali, and French.
Okay, so they are going to be part of our topic for later, but maybe do you want to just say what your podcast is as well, in case the other listeners want to find out more about your work?
For sure, my podcast is called The Stories Beyond Borders, and it's a podcast about immigration stories of people who have moved around all their life, who have settled in a new country, who have exposure to different cultures, and who are navigating their cultural identities. So it's a podcast of storytelling, and it's an interview format where I have invited or I invite people who come from different cultural backgrounds.
Yeah, I've been listening to your latest episode this week, actually. I think it's really interesting, especially for people maybe like me as well, who haven't lived in other places to hear about other people's experiences. And of course, everyone's experience is different, but also to think about the things that we otherwise wouldn't have thought about, like sometimes how it can be difficult for people moving back to their original culture when they haven't spent much time living in that country. Yeah, I guess those kind of things we don't think about. So I think it's good to like broaden your horizons a bit, and to, as well as hearing people's stories, to think about some of the challenges that we might not even be aware of that people have.
Yes.
So it's a good way. Thank you for doing that for us and for bringing these stories to us.
Mhm.
So you have nearly five languages. How did that come about? So which order? Like they didn't all start at the same time. So how did the story of these five languages come into being?
Yes. So the order would be Bengali is the first one, which is my mother tongue. That's the language my parents taught me when I was a kid, and that was the language that we mainly spoke at home. And the second one was Italian, which I always say is my adopted mother tongue because it's a language that I have learned at school, but that I also brought at home. So at home we would also speak Italian, and I would use Italian to communicate with my sister, and I still do. And it's a language that I think I've been like more comfortable with because of course I learned it at school and I learned it from a young age. And we spoke always Bengali and Italian at home. And following that, there was, of course, English, which is taught at school. And now I live in Montreal. I also have done my university in English. Then there is French, which I also learned at school. And I actually work in a French environment. So I find myself using two languages that are not mine to begin with, which are, of course, English and French. And Montreal is a bilingual city, so it happens that we have to use both of the languages. And the language of my choice that I actually have chosen was Spanish in university, which is a language that I am currently working on. It's a work in progress. I took few classes back in uni, and I'm also taking classes now. And that's my almost, five. When it comes to almost five, it's the Spanish that is the language that I'm working on, and it's the language that I have actually chosen to study because the other ones were not something that I have chose, were something that were given to me, like Bengali, Italian. I had really no choice, and the same thing goes for English and French.
Okay, so you have five to keep. Does it feel like you're actively giving time to all of them, or does it happen naturally, apart from the Spanish, which you have to work on, but the others, does it happen naturally that you practice all of them throughout your week, or do you have to like dedicate time to make sure that none of them get left behind?
No, I actually, it happens really naturally because, of course, living in Montreal, um, living in Montreal where I have to speak both English and French, I don't have much of a choice. I have to use them on a regular basis.
Mm.
And at work, of course, where I spend basically a chunk of my time, I use pretty much French to communicate with the people around me and with my friends and some of my relatives. Again, I also use English and French. And then with my high school friends and when I go to my Italian stores here in Montreal, I happen to use Italian. And of course, with my family, I use again Italian and Bengali. So I'm actually like using all of them on an equal level on a regular basis.
That's good because I know some people say I think it's more when people have made more choices to learn additional languages. Like in my case, I've none of them are languages that I need to speak. Maybe now so I do because I've got some clients that expect me to speak German because that's what we do. But none of them, I don't live in a country where other languages are main languages. So I have German and Romanian and Portuguese, and they are all my choice. But I think when you are in that situation, you sometimes have to make time, like make sure that you don't, for me, it's don't neglect the middle one because like the one that I'm more familiar with, I'm doing more challenging things with it and using it at work. That's okay. The newest one, that's getting more love and attention because it needs it. It's like the baby of the language family. It needs more. And then the middle one sometimes just gets neglected, but you don't have that because all of yours are being actively used in some way in your life.
Exactly. Do some on a regular basis, especially when I came to Montreal. I was studying in English at university, so it was my first time actually doing a degree in a language that was not mine to begin with. So I was ready for the challenge, but I also felt like I had a good training back when I was in Italy when it came to learning English. And then when it came to French, of course, in Montreal, I don't know if you know, but it's a bilingual city and it's in the province of Quebec. And here they don't speak French from France; they speak French from Quebec, which is a little bit different than the regular French. And when I moved here, I had to take some conversation classes and do some active listening to basically be comfortable with the Quebecois accent because it's not something that was familiar to me, to be honest, and it's quite different, and there are different expressions, different words for certain things. So I had to really get comfortable with that, and it was a goal that I had in my mind, which was I will eventually work in a French environment, which I finally was able to do. And the fact that of course like I'm using like now French, it just comes natural to me when I'm communicating with people. Like I'm so immersed in the French environment that when I'm talking to people, approaching them for the first time, like French comes just natural to me.
It's interesting, isn't it? They're all been for different reasons. And I was wondering if you had to have a business conversation in Italian, would that be harder for you because you haven't worked in an Italian business environment, or do you still read enough in your Italian, for example, to be able to do that and to have those conversations?
I mean, for sure, for certain like terminologies and certain words, because for instance, like English, I study finance in English, of course, and I'm much more familiar with like the English terminologies, and I know that even in Italian they use some of the English terminologies to explain some of the concept, but I think I would definitely be much more comfortable with like English when it comes to explaining financial knowledge, because that's the way I studied it. It's not that I'm not going to be able to explain it in Italian, but I think when you are so comfortable with certain words that you have only learned in certain languages, I feel like it just comes out better. And I think even in Italian, when they're trying to explain some words, they always use some English words because I think it just comes off better.
Yeah, they're coming in everywhere, like financial words. Maybe I don't know so much about that, but IT as well. IT terms tend to adopt some English terms when another one may exist, but the more people use the English one, that's what they come to expect.
Hmm. Right.
And and you've got some interesting, like you've got some languages from a similar family, so you're French, you're Italian, Spanish. Do you find there's much interference, or can you keep them very separate in your brain?
I think what the problem is right now is that because I live in Montreal, it's very normal to use what we call franglais. which is basically a combination of French and English. So when you're speaking with someone, it's very common that there is a full sentence in English and suddenly there is a word in French. So there is a lot of like Anglicism when we are speaking in French. I think my main difficulty is when it comes to practicing Spanish because when I'm taking like my Spanish lessons, I really have hard time switching from French to Spanish because, and I think there's like an actual like I think there's an actual saying that sometimes when you are learning a new language, that new language is often influenced by the last language that you have learned.
Mm.
So I'm speaking in Spanish with someone, but then I feel like French words are coming out, and that's when I have a little bit of hard time distinguishing it and like just separating the two languages. And I think even when I was in university and taking some like writing lessons or like writing essays in Spanish, I would realize afterwards that I was actually using French words when I was doing the essays, and I did not realize it because it was just so ingrained in me. So I have a little bit of hard time when it comes to that.
I think that's really interesting that you said that because of the last two, because like with my latest or most recent two, they are similar languages. And so I just assumed it was because of that. But if there's this other contributing factor, which means it's like because the other first one is more established, and it could be that the latest two that they will confuse each other ever, even if they are a bit more different, but even more so when they're from the same family. So that's really interesting that our brain seems to store them in the order that they were learned.
Yes. Yes.
And how about you? So like you are one person and five languages. Do you think different parts of your personality come out in each language?
I think I think yes. I do think there is a different side of me that comes out. I think when I'm speaking in English and French, there is a more professional side that comes out, and I think it's probably because I use them in a professional setting, and
Mm,
and that's how I've learned them. Like I think English, I learned it in university, I learned it at school, and French I've been using it in an office environment. So I think there is a more professional and a more relaxed individual that is coming out. But I think when I'm speaking in Italian, there is a different, completely side of me that comes out. It's a more, I would say, it's more loud. If that makes sense, I think there is like a different side, a more loud, more bubbly that comes out when I'm speaking in Italian and Bengali, and I think that's because that's the language that I am feeling most myself. So
okay. You can
yeah,
relax more.
yeah.
And we're focusing very much on the language side of things, but there is moving to a new country and working there also means that it's language plus culture, you know. So like were there things that you had to get used to in terms of the working culture there that were new?
Yes, I think, especially because I live in Canada, which is completely different from Europe, I think there's a different mentality when it comes to work. For instance, in Canada, for instance, like there's so much emphasis on investing in your education. There's so much emphasis in going to networking events. There is emphasis in building your LinkedIn profile, working in your personal brand. There's also emphasis on like how you change jobs very often. Like it's very, like I noticed since I started to work that people like change jobs very often after a couple of years, and that's because they want a better salary, career advancement. Whereas in Europe, what I would notice is that if you are lucky to find a job, you just stick to that job until you retire, pretty much. Like no one, no, you're not enticed to change and go for another job. You just stick to one job. And there is less emphasis on building your brand. There is less emphasis on having a LinkedIn profile. Whereas here, I feel like as soon as you're done with school, for instance, university, people are highly encouraged to keep investing in themselves and keep investing in their knowledge. And so there is that kind of mentality shift that I noticed, and I think that's why people are very competitive in the market. Like there's so many good talents, and there's so much also there is also better future for them as well. Like in Italy, for instance, yes, you can get a great education and so forth, but then it's so hard to find a job, which is why a lot of people are actually moving out of Italy and going elsewhere because there is there isn't like a future for them. And I think that's related to the job market, related to the education and so forth. So I feel like in Canada and in the States, like people are highly recognized for the work that they do and for what they can bring.
That's interesting. I think the point about staying with one company may be changing now, that people are more, it depends on the sector, but perhaps there's more of an interest in moving around, moving up, moving into areas that are more interesting. But the whole idea of having a personal brand is not as common unless you're talking about independent professionals. So
Mhm.
they talk or we talk, because that's me as well, a lot about having this personal brand because you're selling your services and you want people to relate to you. But the idea of people who are employed focusing on that isn't, you're right, that isn't something I've seen as much of. And I think, I guess when you're moving to another country, you have to learn all of this, another continent as well, because moving from Europe to Canada. And how would you say that was for you, this idea then that you spoke French before you moved to Canada? Okay, different kind of French, but you already had that grounding in the language. But what about the professional version of you? Did it take some time to really communicate as yourself as a professional, or did that come at the same time as you were developing your French identity in the rest of your life as well?
I think it was just developed naturally, to be honest. I think that I was so immersed in the environment itself that it just came naturally. I think I was just a lot more aware of the cultural differences because here in Montreal it's very, very diverse. Like you're not just interacting with people that are like French Canadians, you're also interacting with people that are coming from different parts of the world. So you always have to adapt yourself and you always have to be mindful of other cultures, what you say, the body language, the gestures. And I was very, I would say, trained already working in English environment. I was pretty much trained in that. And I think when I switched to the French environment, I just had to like learn certain words that were used in the French environment, like that are more related to the financial world. That was something that I really had to learn. And then the rest just came along. I just learned to adapt myself to the different circumstances. And especially my company is very bilingual. Like it's just you use both languages and you change language depending on who you have in front of you. And what's so interesting here is that I don't know if you have ever visited Montreal, but
I have actually, yeah.
you have. Okay, so when you are approached by people, they always approach you by saying bonjour, hi, and then it's up to you to choose the language you want to be served in. So that's one thing that I have learned is that when I'm reaching out to people, I always have to address them with my two languages, and then it's up to them to let me know what language they prefer to be served. And so that's one thing that I had to learn with time.
That's interesting because it's also nice that you're giving people that choice and
Mhm.
not assuming which language they want to use based on any other factors. It's saying, okay, I'm approaching you, so you get to choose which language you're going to use for communication.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We're always giving a choice, honestly. Like even when I am outside, when I'm in the office, at the doctor, in a store, like they always approach you with two languages and then you decide what language you prefer.
Is it okay to ask? Like, does it depend on what mood you're in, or do you have a preference, or does it depend on the situation?
So usually it's not you're not asking, you always say bonjour, hi, and then depending on how the other person responds, then you continue in the language the other person responded to. So let's say I'm saying bonjour, hi to you, and then you say hi, then I'm gonna continue, like I got the hint that you want to be served in English. But if you say like bonjour, then I got the hint that you want to be served in French. So that's how we know, those are the cues. I think there was a shift in me. I used to be served before in English, but now I just go directly in French because I think I'm just so used to it right now that I'm so immersed in the whole French environment that I just
Hmm.
keep on with the French.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense when it's around you all the time. And I know you're established now, but if you think back to this time when you were moving there and just getting established, what or who would you say helped you with this process? Because obviously you're doing the work, but usually there are some people or some resources or some situations that help us. What would you say helped you to make this process a bit easier?
I think the fact that I was very curious and open-minded about everything around me, and the fact that I also did not shut the French language, because for people who move around a lot and come to Montreal, I think often what they find difficult is the French language. They find it really, it's a big hurdle, it's a barrier, and this is also why they move out of the province because they just don't make an effort to actually continue learning the language or actually master the language. And I told myself that I don't want to like shut the door for that, meaning that yes, I knew how to speak English and everything, and I had a good solid base of French. But I also told myself that if I want to increase my opportunities of like creating a better life, I need to make an effort in that. I really have to make an effort in knowing how to communicate in French and being a master in French, and that's what I did. And I think doing that really put me in a different position because I always say like knowing an extra language, it just makes you so much richer. You are much more knowledgeable. You have another language that you carry in your luggage, and I think it's always important to continue practicing them and never losing the languages. So, I moved to Montreal, and this is where, it's bilingual. But what if I want to move to another place where the French is spoken? So the fact that I made that effort, like it's always gonna help me. It's always gonna
Hmm.
reward me. So I'm very curious, and I always keep an open mind in that sense.
It's an investment in you, isn't it? It's not just I have to do this for this situation. It's something that you can then um,
Exactly.
use in the future. And the more you do it, I think the easier it gets. So the more familiar you are with the language, the easier it is for you to communicate in that language. Then it does feel less effort because you've done the groundwork. You've laid really good foundations, so you can then build on them.
Exactly. Exactly. And I love learning languages. I
Yeah.
personally do. Yes.
And do you think that, I'm not asking for examples of specific people, but do you think that having that attitude and that curiosity has opened you up, not just to business opportunities? Do you think people relate to you differently or more open to you because they can see that you're making the effort?
Yeah. I think they do relate to me more. And this is also why I openly talk about it because I think when you're sharing all the success stories, people have a little bit of hard time. But if you can share the difficulty that you had in learning a language, adapting yourself in a new country, also using a language that is not yours to begin with, I think people can relate to you so much better because they know the struggle they went through. And I think it's important to do that because you're building a community. People feel like they belong to something, and you're creating a tribe. And I think for people like me who have moved around so many times, like it's normal, for instance, that when you're learning a language, there is a whole accent part, and sometimes there's the imposter that kicks in, and you're like, I'm not sure if I want to speak this language because I sound very terrible when I'm speaking in that
Mm.
language. But I always tell people like you knowing another language, you knowing like you having an accent, it just means that you know another language, and you should see that as an asset. And so, like reframing certain things, I used to think of how I sounded when I was speaking both in English and French, and I felt like I always had a strong accent. But then I would hear other people who had an accent, and I was like, they sound beautiful. So I'm pretty sure I sound the same way too. So seeing like I think I reframe the way I see myself. Like with my accent, I tell myself it's because I know another language, and that's all that is. It doesn't matter anything. So I just help people to accept their diversity basically.
I really like that, and I think it can be expanded. Of course, it's true with the accent, but it's also true with like the level of fluency and the way in which you can communicate. If you're learning a new language, you can feel a bit frustrated sometimes because you don't have the full rich vocabulary that you have in your first language or even another one. But we can reframe that as well and say, okay, well, this is the situation now. It's because I could have this conversation in three or four different languages. I'm having it in this one now, and this is the level I am today. But tomorrow can be different. It's not like you're going to be stuck there forever if you do the work, but it's not about feeling, oh, I'm a child. I communicate like a child. It's like, okay, this is an
Yeah.
achievement because I've managed to do this in my whichever number language. Um,
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It's like you said, you should see that as an achievement, something to celebrate. Not everyone can speak that many languages. So the fact that you were able to do that and being able to communicate and having a communication and move and travel around and being able to communicate in the local language, I think it's a big achievement.
yeah, and I think not making I don't mean excuses, but not apologizing. Like sometimes I say, "Oh, this is not my my next additional language." You know, like this is like why do we feel the need to make to apologize when we are learning and we are putting the effort in? I think it would be good to see that in a different way sometimes,
Yeah.
to see yourself in a different way, and then other people see how you treat yourself as well.
Yes, exactly.
So with the podcast, then you are bringing other people's stories to us and their experiences. What gave you the idea to start the podcast, and why do you feel it's important to bring these perspectives to others?
I have started the podcast. It's actually going to be a year now. I have started it because prior to my podcast, I used to be on the other side as a guest, and I would do a lot of podcast appearances. But I told myself now it's time to switch my role and be on the other side and be the host. And I think I have a very entrepreneurial mindset. And because of that, I was like, I think I'm ready to start a podcast. And I always wanted to have that feeling of what does it mean to have a podcast? And seeing like something that you create into fruition, I think it's a beautiful journey.
Mm,
And what happened is I actually thought of a niche. I was like, okay, what is it that I want to talk about? What is it that is so close to my heart that I'm passionate about? And I think immigration stories has been something that has been really close to me, especially because I'm an immigrant. My parents were immigrants, and we all moved for different reasons. And I think the world is so globalized in that sense that you have really people from every corner of the world that I was like, they must have a story. They must have a reason of why they have moved. And so that's why I created a podcast because I wanted to create a platform of storytelling for people who have moved around and who needed a place to share their stories. So that's why I created it.
yeah, and I think it's important that we hear from each other as well. I think it's a great idea. I didn't know about your podcast before we met online the first time, and I'm glad that I've discovered it because I think it's we can learn so much from each other by listening to stories and understanding other people's
Yes.
experiences and perspectives.
Yes.
So do you find it easy to find people to be guests on your podcast?
Yeah, it's actually not that I'm always searching for people for my podcast, but it's not that hard to find people that share the same profile that I'm looking for. I'm usually looking for people who are biracial. I'm looking for people who are third culture kids. I'm looking for people who have moved around, who have studied in one place, grew up in another place, parents come from a different place. I'm just looking for people who have really different cultural backgrounds. So it's easy to find that. And right now, I'm also recording for a new series, which is called Women Beyond Borders, and I'm just highlighting stories of women who have moved around. And I'm planning to release that for March 2027 around International Women's Day because I would really want to highlight the story of all the women that have moved around and the struggles they went through.
Okay, that sounds really interesting, and I'm looking forward to listening to that as well. And I think as well, a lot of people who have a really good story to tell. A lot of the people that I speak with haven't been on a podcast before, and they oh, what's it like? You know, how will it be? But and then afterwards they say that they enjoyed it. It was a good experience, and for some of them, they've gone on to do more podcasts. So I think sometimes it's just having the courage to do your first one as a guest, and then other good things can follow. But I guess
Yes.
it is a big step for people if they haven't done it before. But yeah, I think it's a really a good thing to do to share your story and also to for other people to be able to learn from your experiences as well.
Yes.
But I will add the link to, I'll add your links and the link to your podcast to our show notes page. Is there anything else you would like to share in terms of advice for people who are relocating or who are having to build their identity in a language that isn't their first language for professional reasons? Have you got any final tips?
I would say for people who are always moving around and relocating to a new place, always make an effort to learn the local language. And before you know it, when you are actually speaking the local language to someone, they will actually really appreciate it because I think people love that sense of home when you are speaking their local language. So let's say
Mm.
you're moving to a place where they speak French, for instance, make an effort to learn the language and see when you are going out that as soon as you're reaching out to people and speaking with them in French, they will appreciate you so much more because you're really making an effort to learn that language.
Okay, yeah, good advice. And so thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us. And yeah, thank you for coming on the podcast for contacting me because I didn't know about you before, so I'm glad that we met.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.